Net gain, networking, encouragement, training, helping Snow Landscape and all small businesses hire, train, retain, and engage the best teams to build those win-win workplaces. Are you looking to thrive at work? Here is your net gain.
Welcome to Net Gain. This is Networking Encouragement Training. I'm your host, Evan Tashwire from Jack of All People Trades. We exist to help Snow Landscape and all small businesses hire, train, retain, and engage the best teams so you can build those win-win workplaces. I'm excited for a discussion today on succession planning. I have with me Phil Harwood from Tamarisk Business Advisors, Tamarisk Legal Advisors, and also he's the lead snow commander of the Snow Fighters Institute. So, Phil, if you want to introduce yourself real quick to the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate being here, Evan. Been in the landscape snow industry for 41 years this year, so it's been a minute, but it's been a great, rewarding career. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and just really, really grateful for where I'm at in my career and able to just work with companies and come alongside them as they try to improve their businesses, but also get ready for generational handoffs or to sell in some cases, or to buy. There's lots of companies that are buying companies right now. So it's an exciting time. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we're going to get in this discussion is for anybody, especially an ownership perspective. If you're thinking about succession, even if especially if you're thinking about it now or soon, but even if you're not, how do you position yourself one day if it when it becomes a potential option, if it's not being handed? So, yeah, just real quick, give an overview of, I know you've done several things in the snow industry. I've been on Snow Fighters webinars. I've been, to grow the bench back in the day. I've been to several different things. So, but Tamarisk Advisors. So, give an overview of
Mhm.
what you guys do as an industry. So, you explained earlier, you're not an insurance company having risk in there.
Right. Yeah, tamarisk, the name tamarisk is a tree, and it's a tree of legacy. And you can go to our website if you want and read about that. But what we do is we help business owners and their teams and their families, to be honest, prepare for transition. Or so sometimes transition involves a family member, a child or children, or a close associate or a partner. So there's kind of a generation or an inter-company transfer that's occurring, and there's a lot at stake, right? So nobody wants to get this wrong. Everyone wants to optimize this. We also help people who are looking to sell because there's not someone who's in the family or in the business who can take over and fill the shoes of the next leader of the organization. And so whether it's, looking to sell or a generational thing, that's really what we're spending most of our time doing. I still do a fair amount of strategic planning work and leadership team development. I think anyone who's heard me speak on this topic before has probably heard me talk about EOS. My company was one of the original guinea pig EOS companies. We worked directly with Gino Wickman, the founder, as he was developing that system, and I love that, and I love everything about strategic planning. But man, with the demographics, the aging of our society, the silver tsunami, as it's called, there's just such a demand for succession planning and exit planning. But like I mentioned in my intro, there's a lot of companies that are buying right now, so there's kind of like two sides to it, right? For every seller, there's a buyer out there. So there's a lot going on. We're knee deep in it, and that's what we're doing at Tamarisk Advisors.
Absolutely. So great overview. And one thing about net gain, the T is for training. So I always try to hit with takeaways. So people listening can have those two or three or more things that you can really take away from the episode. But I think from an ownership perspective, a takeaway, and you can expand on this, is understanding what's at stake and preparing. And that doesn't mean preparing is not even just, in my opinion, when you're ready to sell, but even starting to think down that road in the future,
Mhm.
starting to think through if you have ownership, who owns what percent of the business, what will
Mhm.
in this case, not even if you're totally not intending to sell. I think it's good to have that documented when things are good, because when they're not, I've heard the stories, and I don't want to share that. Some have been shared at conferences. I don't want to share it without
Mhm.
the person's permission, but I've heard the stories of, like, we got to the point of selling or somebody came to buy, and then all of a sudden we were like, wait, I own this, or this was my idea, no, this was mine, and there was a lot
Mhm.
of questions not answered. So as far as preparing, I guess, you know where should people even start thinking about that as business owners?
Well, it really starts the beginning at the very, very beginning of when you're founding your company, when you're forming your company. That's really the best time to think about it because if that's on your mind, if succession one day is on your mind at from day one, then you're less likely to put yourself in harm's way along the way. You're going to make better decisions as you structure your company and as you grow your company and when you're hiring people and when you're creating definitions of roles. If you have the exit in mind all along the way, then you're just going to be in such a great position. But that rarely happens. So usually what happens is people start thinking about succession after they're well into their business. So, decades in typically, because people start thinking, man, I've been grinding away for a long time. How do I get out of this thing? I'd like to retire someday. I got grandkids. I want to travel, or maybe, I've had an injury and an illness and I need to slow down and I have to get serious. So that's when people start thinking, well, where do I start? So the ultimate answer, the best place is day one, but inevitably it's not day one. It's decades after day one. But the best place to start, honestly, whenever we're engaging with someone, is with a valuation because the valuation is not just giving us the potential selling price of the business. And if we're handing the business off to children, maybe we don't even care about a valuation price, but what the valuation process does is it uncovers all the opportunity that's there to optimize the transition. Okay, so that's the process. And as we're going through that process, we're also embarking on a robust kind of a parallel process. Well, it's not a parallel process. Evaluation is the beginning of clarity. Clarity is a part of our kind of two-part framework called the Tamarisk method. So clarity is the beginning. The valuation is the beginning of clarity. Clarity helps the owner understand what it's going to look like for them personally to exit their business. Again, whether they're selling or handing off to kids, what are they going to do afterward? And what does life look like? And how much money do they need? Where are they going to live? What are they going to spend their time doing? How are they going to enjoy that post exit experience? And so there's a lot of work to be done around that, but there's a ton of work to be done within the business to get the business ready for the owner to exit and have that succession plan be successful. So that process, the very beginning of that clarity process is the valuation. And again, it's not just a number, it's understanding all of the opportunity for us to work with that owner and their team to get them ready. And, of course, the more time we have, the better, right? If we have 6 months, that's not a great scenario. If we have 5 years, that's a wonderful scenario.
Gotcha. So definitely gave a lot of good, takeaways to chew on. Number one is I'll say, even if you're in that situation of you haven't thought about secession from the beginning, think about it then as early as you can or give yourself as
Mhm.
much runway as you can. The five,
Right.
like I think the 5 years versus 6 months is a good thing because it's even if you're wanting out, at least knowing there's an out, like 5 years might seem like a long time, but if
Mhm.
you eat it and it's really been something that's worthwhile, you don't want to just rush that ending because you're feeling stressed. You want to make sure you get
Mhm.
maximum value, you hand it off. And then I think one thing you said too is, before I get to the valuation piece, the kind of thinking about it from day one, I almost look at it like that's a lens then you see your business through. And the big thing I see core values, like what has to be passed down for you as an owner to that next generation, whether it's going to be bought, whether it's going to be family succession, like, if you're wanting to keep your team, which, that could be a whole discussion in and of
Mhm.
itself, like what has to stay in place and how do you define that? But yeah, I think the clarity, the valuation, and the life after, so once you kind of get into that valuation, clarity's been brought to like where the owner sees themselves. What does that next step look like as far as getting the business ready? So if an owner is say in that spot of thinking like I want to sell, what would I need to do to get the business ready after that valuation and clarity?
Well, some of the uh, typical things that come up are financial management aspects. So, getting nice, clean, defensible financials. Um, understanding what's typically called in the M&A world as the seller's discretionary income, not income, but their earnings, SDE. I'm sorry, seller's discretionary earnings. There we go, nailed it. Um, so what that is the amount of money that the owner of the business has at their discretion. So it's more than just net profit, right? And it's more than EBITDA. It's everything the owner is able to run through the business. Um, and I'm not suggesting there's improprieties going on. Uh, Owners have the ability to pay for a lot of their personal expenses through the business, completely legal. Tax laws have been written for business owners, let's be honest. And so, if you think about what a business owner can benefit from by being the owner, we need to understand that number so the acquirer can look at this business and say, well, if I owned it, that would be for me. I would get all those things, right? And there's all kinds of adjustments, and it's probably beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But there's adjustments in terms of, if the owner's taking out too little of a salary or too much of a salary, we would adjust that to something called a normal amount. That's a normalization process. I'm probably getting too deep in the weeds here, but the
That's
financial piece is really important. So obviously, any buyer, or even if we're transferring the business and the children are buying it, maybe the children are taking out an SBE loan. And so, where there's valuation methodology that comes into play. It's important for everyone to understand all the jargon and lingo, and there's a ton of jargon happening here when you start getting into succession planning. And so I think one of the things that we work with people right from the beginning is putting things in plain language and helping them understand the process and getting rid of all the jargon. Uh, so I think financials is a big one. The other one is the strength of the leadership team and the owner's role, which kind of gets into the people side of the business. Often the owners are way too involved, and that prevents them from leaving their businesses because who are they going to hand things off to? And they don't want their baby to go sideways on them. So, if the owner can systematically pull themselves out of tasks and responsibilities and hand them off to other people who are capable, that's a great thing. And that goes back to my day one statement, because if from day one the owner is intentionally not putting themselves in that position, then we're way better off than an owner who's 20 or 30 years in and wears every hat, makes every decision, and doesn't really have a good team that can step up and run the business. So those are the two big buckets: financial, the financial bucket, and the people bucket, I'll call it.
Yeah, I like that. So yeah, like you said, the takeaway is just to mirror that. Think about once you have that valuation and clarity on your future as an owner, wanting to sell, wanting to transition out, or explore succession. Think about getting those financials ready, and think about getting the people side ready. So I like what you said too about the simple language, because one thing you said that really resonated with me on the seller's discretionary earnings was, what all would I get out of this business? So if you were working with somebody and I'm a buyer, what would I be able to earn out of this business?
Mhm.
And
Right.
really be able to see that, because at the end of the day, that's really what, we're in business to make money. So we want to be able to see, what would we
Mhm.
be able to make, and everything in the financial position too, because we want to see, obviously, are there debt obligations we're coming into,
Mhm.
we need to be aware of, so this gets to the buyer side, I think, or what are maybe some good buyer questions to ask from that financial side if you're thinking about acquiring a business.
Mhm. Yeah, buyers first thing they want are P&Ls. They want to see the history of the company in terms of its growth. Is this company growing? Is it shrinking? Is it bouncing all over the place in terms of its revenue? If there's stability there, in terms of revenue, because there's long-term contracts, there's a good sales process, there's a good sales team, and that has a high renewal rate, retention rate. There's basically subscription revenue. I mean, that's what's ideal, right? Repeat revenue that you don't have to sell, just ongoing. I think of the classic example of, the the furnace company. Like there's a sticker on my furnace, right? I'm not going to call anyone else other than the company's name on my, and I couldn't even tell you what the name of the company is. I don't care. If my furnace needs something, there's a sticker on my furnace. That's who I call. That's subscription revenue, right? Now, I actually have a subscription with the company, and I actually do the name, do know the name, my point is that's subscription revenue. So we don't have to resell it; it's sold. If we have long-term contracts and we have evergreen contracts, that's basically subscription revenue if you're renewing at a 90% success rate or higher. And that's what that's the beginning point of looking at financials. What's the composition of the revenue, and is the revenue increasing over time at a reasonable rate? And if a business just does a good job and takes care of its customers, you would expect that business to grow 5 to 10% annually, just organic growth without a whole lot of effort. And so if the business isn't doing that, something's wrong. So then we're going to look at margins, gross profit, operating profit, net profit, EBIT, all that stuff, right? The SDD, SDE. We're going to get into all the different margin analysis. And we're going to look at the same thing and say, is profitability stable? Is this factory stable, or is it, herky jerky? Is it all over the place? Like one year it's making money, the next year's losing money. Is this a reliable thing I'm buying, or is this a mess that I'm going to have to manage? And is it how? And if it's a mess, it's risky, right? I may or may not be able to get this thing right sized and stay afloat. Uh, I don't want to buy a problem, right? So if it's reliable, it's less risky. The value is going to go way up, right? So that's what they're looking at on the financial side. There's some benchmarking involved, and there's some things like that that go into this. But I mean, really, it's more about just getting that business's financial information in front of them and starting to analyze that information.
Yeah, I think really good takeaways there about, looking at the P&Ls, looking at the growth, shrinking the recurring revenue, the kind of like you said, subscription revenue, composition of revenue. Because like you said, if the revenue is very much driven on, well, the owner has to go out and sell 90% of it every year, and the owner's the one stepping aside, that paints a picture of, is this really as much as I have versus if it's, like you said, subscription based, if it's, a bunch of peer groups or online, modules that are coming out of people's accounts every month and are renewable. And you see that, hey,
Mhm.
95% of these, renew every month and we never do anything with it other than update the content. And that can be done by anybody. That paints a much different picture with it too. And I like what you said too about, in addition to the P&Ls, also the, overall kind of, is it a fixer upper in house terms, so to speak, or is it a like ready to
Mhm.
move in, you know what I mean? Because my wife watches Property Brothers all the time, and
Mhm.
some of it too. But I always see that of like, are people going to go lower on cost and try to do a fixer upper, But then there's always that, you know, oh no, Jonathan calls, oh no, we got a problem. We opened this
Mhm.
wall up, and there's, I'd have to take this whole support beam out and basically rebuild the house. So
Right.
there is
Right.
risk too with business of like, it can seem like, oh, I could get a good deal on this. I would say probably in the same way as you don't know maybe what's there if you open the walls on something that doesn't look strong financially. So what would you say to somebody who might be in that boat? Like, get this cheaper. How would you caution people, or at least what questions would you tell them to ask to make sure they don't buy that proverbial fixer upper that's a, dud?
Well, I think it's the instability of the profitability. If the profits are not reliably consistent, well, then there's a reason why. So I would say understand why this is happening. What's going on here? Is there an issue with quality? Is there an issue with turnover? Is there a cultural issue that's causing this? Have there been rifts between partners? Like what's driving the instability? How come this isn't stable? Right? And going back to revenue, I just want to clarify something, and it ties into your question here. Even if the owner is not selling the work, even if other people are selling the work, if the work has to be if a significant part of the revenue has to be resold every year, that's really risky and costs a lot of money versus having 3-year contracts, 5-year contracts, evergreen contracts that don't have to be resold every year. So, you know, And maybe that's where the issue is right there. It's causing the mold behind the wall, right? We're having to resell work every year, and so it's just an unreliable process because we don't know what the economy is going to be like. Maybe we have turnover with our sales staff. Um, you know, our marketing isn't all in ready to go for 1 year, and so our revenues are jumping all over the place, and we have fixed assets, we have fixed overhead, so our profitability is suffering because our revenue is not stable. It could happen right at the top. So there's a lot of places we could see margin, you know, slippage or erosion or just missing the mark. We need to understand why. And that's really what you're talking about with the example of the house. Like, what's going on inside this house here? Someone took out a load bearing wall, and didn't put in the right framing. We got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way to talk about it. And I like what you said because I think it really gets down to diagnostics because kind of like once you know what the issue is, that's why I'm a big feedback person from people side is you can fix what you have feedback on. You can fix what you know. So if you're able to look at those metrics, like you said, if it's the profitability volatility, if it's the one or two people are selling, or like you said, it's not evergreen, it's not long-term contracts, it's every year you're renewing and maybe up and down. So do want to get in the
Mhm.
people side, but you kind of this is my eye personality and disc brain right here. Like if I get a good, shiny object, I have to run after.
Mhm.
So you gave me a shiny object, I have to run after here. So
Yeah,
you mentioned
sure.
about the evergreen ideally you have the evergreen renewables. As you know, in the snow industry specifically, a lot of contracts run on that 1 year, maybe 3 year at most standard.
Mhm.
Some might run to five, but
Sure.
I haven't seen too many that are evergreen. I'm sure they exist out
Mhm.
there. But what would you say to, snow businesses that are kind of saying, hey, look, they go out to bid every year, they go out to bid every three. How can they build some more reliable income in that case? Or is it just a limitation of the industry?
Yeah, the evergreen contracts are more, applicable on residential properties, um, and I see some of those, but you're right. On the commercial side, there's a bid process, RFP process that's gonna apply in most circumstances. In my experience, when you have developed a really tight relationship with your client and they trust you, they never want to lose you, and they will do everything in their power to make sure they don't lose you as a vendor. So that's the goal, right? To develop that relationship, be the trusted partner, and it involves communication, it involves timing. If we're coming out of the winter and we're selling snow contracts and we're not talking to our client until August, like that's a problem, right? We should be coming out of the winter having a conversation about how the winter went and talking about next year and planting seeds and getting pricing and starting to develop that, the framework for the renewal, right? Getting that renewal primed and ready to go. But man, if you have that relationship where they're like your clients just is going to hold on to you no matter what, you can't lose that. You can't screw that up because your client will tell you all the information you need to know to win that renewal. And in my experience, again, it's not about price. It's rarely about price. And if it is about price for some reason, your client will tell you that if you have the relationship. If you don't have the relationship, what'll happen is you won't win the work, and if you can get back to the client will actually have a conversation with you about why you didn't win the work. They'll tell you it's about price. And so, but it's never about price. So, it's a really interesting dynamic, but it's all about the relationship. That's how you develop that evergreen contract, even though it has to go through an RFP process.
Really, yeah, really good feedback, and I think that's helpful. Hopefully, to the snow audience, definitely would love to hear as people
Mhm.
listen to give some feedback. I'll probably clip that down to you know LinkedIn clip because I think it's really important for the industry and for the followers. But like you said, the takeaways from that are really number one, relationships. Like have good
Mhm.
relationships with your clients, property managers, facility managers, everyone involved, decision makers involved. And two, follow up quickly after the season because number one, the pain points are still on their mind. Even if your service wasn't prime, you still are in a position to say, hey, you know what? I know we dropped the ball here. Here's what we're doing about it. We're evaluating. what would you like to see us do about it? Does this meet
Mhm.
standards? Or if there's damage, hey, this is what we're doing to fix it. Does this meet your standards? So I think that relationship and that jumping on it early almost really hits that evergreen. Is that kind of capturing what you were saying?
Yeah, for sure. And even to take that to the next step there, if there were issues, obviously we need to talk about those issues if we haven't already addressed them throughout the winter. But, there's a learning curve when you take over a property. So, I think it's helpful to point out to your client in a appropriate way, basically to say, hey, we've gone through that learning curve. We learned those things. We're never going to do those again, uh, or at least we have a system that's going to address those appropriately going forward. It's on our map. It's our people know about it. Those types of things, as if to say, you surely don't want to go through all this learning curve again with a new contractor. You just went through it with us. We stumbled a couple times and fell down and scraped our knees, but we got up and we owned it and we took care of it, and we're in a better place now to serve your property. Do you really want to go through that with someone else all over again? You probably don't. And so you have to say that in the right way, but that can be a really strong message to take a winter where maybe you did have some incidents and turn it into a positive.
Yeah, I think that's a great message of, what I would say is a takeaway there with the learning curve. And I'm going to bridge that right into people because I think it applies with retaining people too. Is if you're willing to, when you go through those downfalls, you get through the learning curve. People are willing to get through the learning curve. They have a good attitude, they're in line with your culture and they're showing that they're doing things not to repeat the mistakes of the learning curve or to do better after they get, then I think from a client side to a contractor, you definitely want to keep them. But I would also bridge that to the people conversation of if you're leading people, same thing. There's a learning curve in every job. But if people have shown they've gone through the learning curve, they've owned they have a good attitude, they're trying, they're in line with your culture, and they've owned their mistakes and are saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do to adjust in the future. I'll use an example when I was a recruiter, dispatcher, project manager in snow. My first winter I had wasn't really big. My second one was really big, and it was winter of COVID 2020. So that was one that started December. So it was first
Tough
storm.
year to start.
Yeah. So first first year or first storm that people go out, we were a little behind on getting everybody through like run throughs. We had some issues on sites and we ended up losing a site. And when we did, our owner kind of blew it off as like, whatever, I know why we lost it. And I pushed it a little further with my team. I'm like, guys, I'd like to get together with y'all because I need to understand what I could have done better. And I think we need to understand since we're working together what we could do. So we came together as
Mhm.
a team and we all said, hey, what happened? First of all, what were their reasons for cancellation? And let's each of us walk through were there things that we dropped the ball on. For me, mine was, I didn't have a solid process together for training and walkthroughs and timing wise, I hadn't pushed things as far. I'd pushed things on the hiring side, but not the training side as far as I should have. So the next year, that was a goal of mine is 100% before we go. And next year we did get to that point and we did see less issues. So I share that, not to pat myself on the back, but to kind of give
Mhm.
that framework to owners out there that if you see people that are willing to sit down and review those issues, which you should be doing post storm, reviews every chance you get. Obviously, sometimes you have back to backs, maybe it's a couple storms in a row, but you want to nip those issues in the bud because there were times even as a team we didn't have that in place and we started putting that in place later on down the season. But I'm thinking we also could have caught some of that early, like if they were upset saying, hey, look, what do we have to rectify before we lose this contract? But I think the
Mhm.
people side, I share all that to share that if people are willing to go through that learning curve, get better, then they're people you want to keep because they're going to be greatly appreciating assets to you.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, in today's environment, you can't just replace people on a whim. So, you know, most businesses have to work with the people they have, and the three strikes and you're out doesn't apply anymore. I see business owners that are giving lives, for example, and you really have to kind of take a restorative approach with your people, not a punitive approach.
Yeah.
I think a lot of and this has to do with succession too, because if you have staff that's been in place for a full cycle, a full year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. That's so huge compared to, oh, 90% of our team is brand new. Oh, and you have to hire, 100 new people because we lost everyone from last year and no one's coming back. So that that longevity of employment, that tenure is so important for, the generational handoffs and the succession if you're thinking about selling. That consistency with knowing the properties, knowing the internal procedures, knowing how things work, it's so important. And going back to the restorative approach, what's happening today is, and from my perspective anyway, is there's so many people entering the workforce that aren't prepared to work full time and have a career job. They weren't prepared by their families. They weren't prepared by their schools. Um, they didn't have the right examples in their lives. And here they are working for you in your company. Guess what? You have a lot of remedial training to do to help that person become a person who can come to work every day and do a good job. There's work to be done. There's gaps, there's deficiencies, there's things that we never had to think about before as employers that now we have to think about. Basic life skill training to get people to be functional in a work environment. That's on the employer now. And it never used to be that way. So it's a new world, man.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. But kind of first tying it back to the succession of getting prep. We talk about getting your financials prepped. I think from a people side to really get your people prepped, and this is before you're thinking about like this would be a day one ideally. Is number one, have your core values defined, have your market
Mhm.
defined, have you mentioned I think either right at the beginning or before that you were originally with EOS had been familiar with that. I think their model of, do you have the right person in the right seat? So, first of all, do you have your seats defined? What are you doing as an owner? Where are your strengths? And then from there, what do those roles look like under you? What is your, whether it's vice president, chief, director roles look like? What do your managers or field leads look like? What does your office staff look like? What does your field, technicians look like? And what is required in those roles? What are the metrics? What does success look like? So having those defined, and that's something that I do in my business is helping define
Mhm.
those. But really having those roles defined, and then also defining people's strengths. I think I'm a big proponent of DISC, Clifton Strengths. People development is you've got to find where people's strengths are and do what you can to put them in that right seat. It might look a little different each time, but obviously you have to have the seats defined to know what the business needs and then be able to put people in those seats to really find that success. And then I think too with
Mhm.
I like their kind of get do they get it, do they want it, are they capable, what I mean? So do they understand what's expected, do they want to do the job, or is it a role that they're not thriving in because they don't want, and are they capable, do they have that skill set needed to do the job? They may understand what's needed, they may want to do it, but I mean, I can say from a, you know, physical side, I would want, I get what needs to happen as a linebacker for the Steelers. I would want to be one, but I'm not capable. You know what I mean? I'm 5'9" and 43 years old and don't exactly run that fast or I'm that strong. So I might get it and want it, but the capability isn't there. But from your
Right.
kind of what have you seen as far as strengths over the years that snow and landscape companies do and maybe opportunity areas from the people side? I'd be interested to react to that.
Well, I think what I've seen, is that our industry is an attractive industry. If the company is structured well and all the things that you just talked about are in place, um, there is no reason a landscape snow company can't be extremely profitable year after year. And so I see a segment of the industry being extremely, north of 20% net profit over year. It's a very small percentage. I see another larger percentage maybe being 10 to 20% net profit year over year reliably. But then I see a huge portion of the industry less than that and very inconsistent in their profitability. And so it shows me that there's so much opportunity in our industry. However, back to my opening answer here to your question is, the industry is attractive as a whole. There's so much money pouring into our industry from private equity. And what is private equity? It's money that's being invested and looking for a home, right? So it's a lot of it's coming from uh, family offices. So wealthy people have set up investment arms of their family, wealth, if you will. And so that money is only going to move toward good investments. And so our industries are very attractive because of that, if things are done right. And so, the big game right now that's happening is this big roll up, and we see it everywhere, right? So we see the big players in the industry gobbling up everyone up, right? So they're buying smaller companies, they're bolting them on, they're creating platform operations in different, areas of the country. So all this money is pouring in. And what's happening is those companies, those bigger companies that are resulting from these roll-ups are professionally run. They're in some cases, they're focused so much on efficiency and hitting targets that culture suffers. And so that's one of the negatives of what's happening with this PE money. And that can happen. That can be a real thing. However, there's a good side to it as well, is it's creating professionalism in the industry. It's raising the bar for everyone. And so that's a good thing. So I think I'm making a short answer into a real long answer here, but I think what I see is a very attractive industry and a huge opportunity for someone if they do the right things. And if they don't, I think this can be a very frustrating uh, career for someone to run a business in our industry, where they're working way too hard and not making a whole lot of money and with a lot of risk. And honestly, they might even be better off just working for someone else, which is what happens when you sell your business and you stay on, right? So there you go. There's my long answer to your simple question.
Yeah, no, I think like you said, there's definitely the opportunity in the industry. There's definitely been a raised level of professionalism, which I've seen. I think one of the things I'll say that I've seen in my role from a consultant side, especially on the people side, and it is with the people game, and kind of like you said earlier with succession, is like most people aren't starting day one; they're starting when they want to sell. Most people, I don't think, or I don't want to say most, but a good bit of people aren't addressing the people and culture issues proactively because they're not a fire of the day. So,
Mhm.
in other words, recruiting. They're hiring when they need to hire. They're hiring up for snow seasonally, say in maybe September, October, when they're needing a bunch of bodies or putting a bunch of ads out, and not thinking
Mhm.
about what's our strategy year after year, knowing that a lot of these people are seasonal. They might have jobs the next year. They might not be able to be there every season, but how are you building those long-term relationships? Because I've seen it over the course of, I was full-time recruiting for 3 seasons. Even people that said they couldn't come back or were working full-time, if you had good relationship with them,
Mhm.
and they had that
Sure.
day off, or they had that, hey, we're not going to work during this storm, like they would come out
Mhm.
because we had good relationship. But you only
Mhm.
have that if you have a proactive recruiting strategy. If you're just looking to fill seats for the moment. So I think you see it there. You see it on training. It's like, well, we'll train right before the season, or we'll train right before landscape, or just train when they onboard to kind of information dump. But we don't do consistent
Mhm.
training. And that one, where I don't want to say have an issue, but where I would caution leaders on that we could do better, is adults, is we don't learn the way kids do with bucket dumps of information. We need to learn in small bites applied to the job. Because I've seen, for example, I saw a presentation, owner ran by me. They're like, well, you're in training. Can you look at my, seasonal deck that I did for my meeting and see, like, I feel like I trained them really well and they missed a lot this season. So I went through it. It was like 100 some slides. And I asked him, I said, the information's really good. There's some good scenarios, there's good interactivity. I said, how did you present this? He's like, at the winter kickoff meeting. I said, that's your problem right there. I said, you information dumped 82 slides in one
Mhm.
3 hour period or 4 hour period. People aren't going to retain like that. Where this would have been very valuable is if morning huddles say every Monday or every Monday and Wednesday as you got closer to the season, you did one exercise where it's like, all right, we're going to do an exercise on ice checks. I want you to look at these pictures and tell me what you're seeing. Or we're going to visit a site and we're going to go stake. And I want you to tell me what you should be staking. And if you do that small piece by piece over time, same thing with people training. I see the same mistake made from a disc side with like personality profiles is, and usually the consultant that gets brought in, and I try to advise against this is, people are like, oh, I want to book you for a disc session. So in other words, send the assessments to my team. They'll do them. You come in, do a big explanation of what it is, put a graph up of like where our team lies. We talk for a little bit, and then we go and everybody puts their papers in their drawer, their assessments away on the drive, and they don't ever get talked about again. And they don't get
Mhm.
part of your culture. Whereas, at your morning huddles, at your seasonal kickoff meetings, at your one on ones with your supervisor, not saying everyone, but they should be somewhat frequent topics of conversation through things like icebreakers, 5 minutes of learning. Hey, if we're talking about disc, let's say for communication for like, say, our account managers, have every sales meeting we have, somebody needs to present something related to disc, whether it's out of your report, you can look up an external article, but you've got to present to the team something you found valuable. So I think that also takes intentionality. Same thing with like employee engagement and surveys. So I,
Mhm.
my long answer and what I would say is to kind of wrap it up and you get your reaction to this is to owners or leaders, I would say like, look, how can you put your people functions, your recruiting, your training, employee engagement in proactively and consistently, and also fight for it because here's the thing, there's never going to be what feels like the right time.
Yeah, no, I think everything you just said is super important. My most of my work has been done at the leadership team level. Aside from the time I was a contractor, of course, because I was knee deep in recruiting and dealing with frontline people. But when I think about succession planning, the quality and the strength of that leadership team is really the most significant thing. Obviously, you need employees to do the work, so everything you just talked about super critical. But we're really focused on that leadership team level, having clarity about who's on the team, how that team functions, how decisions are made, what the owner's role is there within that team. And then all those, that's why I love EOS, because it's really the model of EOS starts with the leadership team and flows down throughout the organization. And Gino famously said, as goes the leadership team, goes the company. So, it all starts at the top and goes downhill from there. So, we're really focused on that leadership team most initially, and I think that's where most of the consequential decisions are made.
I think that's a great thing to kind of really close with because it's a really good point. Is like you said, as goes the leadership, goes the company. I can say from both advising, as a consultant and a full time employee, like companies that have had strong leadership and believed in talent development and succession and building up internally from the top, those are organizations I've, from a talent development, leadership development role, been able to be successful, whether it's full time or consulting. Ones that haven't believed that I could put the same approaches in place and it was only going to get so far. Like it may get buy in from the employees, it may get buy in from the field managers, but it's only going to get so far. So for a company, your people aren't thriving. I would say if your employee turnover is high, your retention isn't up, your employee engagement's not up, you're not seeing the results you want to see, ask yourself first, how committed am I to my employee development and my full employee life cycle from recruiting, and hiring the best to onboarding to then training, employee engagement, ongoing development, career planning. And I think too, another big thing that I've found successful is having some kind of future, especially as you grow and scale, having some kind of future leaders development program, because one of the things that always, here I go going it's a nice little shiny thing again, but this one is shiny, so I'm going. Having with leadership, you often see the person who's best in the field, the best operator, the best sidewalk crew member. It's like, oh, let's make them the supervisor. Let's make them the leader because they're great at what they do. The best developer in a technology company. Let's make them the supervisor and lead. In the EOS thing, the seat of what's required in the leadership seat of leading people is different than what's required in the developer seat or in the heavy equipment operator seat. And if you're not willing to provide and help them get those skills, and even first of all, know they need a different set of skills to go there. And then number two, provide them, you're not setting your team up for success ultimately. You're actually setting yourself up potentially for failure, or at least for uncertainty, because you might not know if they're good at this, are they good at that? And also to the EOS point, do they want that?
Hmm. Right.
So I think a lot of good stuff here. Anything you'd close with, Phil, that we didn't talk about? I think this has been a great discussion. Hopefully, it gives owners something to think about, both how you prep your business, your financials, and your people for succession, both for today and tomorrow. But anything you want
Hmm. Yeah, two things real quick. One is everyone who's an adult, anyone 18 or over, needs an estate plan. And
to?
so that's an essential thing that we talk about with owners and leadership teams specifically, but really every adult needs an estate plan, which helps define what happens to all their stuff when they pass. And that, no one likes to think about this, but certainly if we're thinking about succession planning and our, exiting the business, we have to be contemplating what happens to our estate when our time's up, and we never know when our time's up, right? So estate planning doesn't have to be complicated, and if anyone wants to chat about estate planning, seek me out, happy to talk to you about that. But that's an essential part of this, and it's not just for the business owner, it's for every single adult. The second thing I just want to mention, I brought up the Tamarisk method. And actually, my business partner, Tabitha Hart, has written a book on the Tamarisk method. And it talks about the two kind of prongs of our approach. So we talked about clarity. The other prong is called foundation. And that's really where we do the work of transforming the business. And again, it takes a little time there. We can't do it overnight. Clarity helps us understand what needs to be done, so it brings to life all the things that the valuation exposes and all the work that needs to be done. And then foundation is the process of actually transforming the business and getting it ready. So I just wanted to mention that because I brought up clarity. I didn't mention foundation. So there you go. There's the whole approach. And I thank you for inviting me here. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, Phil. I appreciate you giving that, closing both about estate planning and, the Tamarisk method clarity. So where can people contact you and Tamarisk advisors if they're interested in having a conversation or getting started on succession for their business?
Yeah, our website is tamariskadvisors.com. So I would say that all the information that you need is right there, and our contact information is there, and our phone number and a web form and all that good stuff. So that's probably the best place.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. So if you're listening
Thank
on
you.
the podcast, it'll be in the show notes so you can go right there and check them out. This has been Phil Harwood and Evan Tashwire, Net Gain Networking Encouragement Training from Jack of All People Trades, helping you find, retain, and engage the best teams so you can build those win-win workplaces. We're out. Weather, but you ain't gonna slip and fall with that. Why? Cause we snow fighters, we assaulting that. Get it, salting that. King